Chairman. I think it's appropriate to say, comrade, because it's born all the way through the ages in the labour and trade union movement. What I'm going to do today is to analyse the Labour Party Manifesto in order that we can understand the difference between a political party which wants to retain the status quo and a political party like the Socialist Labour Party which wants to change the society in which we live. The Labour Party 2017 manifesto is slick, polished, and certainly in the tradition of the manifestos produced by the right wing of the party in the 1950s and the 1960s. I recall an outstanding left leader once describing the mid-1960s Labour Party manifesto as just a glossy magazine rather than a manifesto. The 2017 Labour Party manifesto is no different. It is certainly not a socialist manifesto. An analysis of the main points of this manifesto expose the devil's bargain which factions within that party have had to make in order that it be accepted by both the right and left of the party. It is in fact classical social democracy manifesto. Let's examine some of the things it says and some of the things it omits. Creating an economy that works for all. Well, let's examine it. Labour's economic strategy states is based on putting, quotes, small businesses at the centre of our economic strategy. I would have thought its main strategy should include and involve the class it represents rather than the business class it refers to. It wants an industrial strategy which will support businesses create new, high-skilled, high-paid and secure work across the country. That, by the way, is in chapter 1. There's no reference to rebuilding Britain's publicly owned manufacturing industries, which prior to joining the European Common Market and later the European Union formed 80% of Britain's strong economic base. Today, only 10% of Britain's economy is based upon its manufacturing industries. Any doubt about the way in which the Labour Party sees a future Britain is very clear. On page 27, it states that it's for a mixed market economy. It's under the heading, a new deal for business. This is supposed to be a Labour Party that wants change. It makes clear that the future Labour Party, if elected, would only reform the rules of companies so that they can stay focused on delivering shared wealth. Their comment, not mine. For example, listen to this one. Labour will amend company law so that directors owe duty directly not only to shareholders but to employees, to customers, the environment and the wider public. Labour's determination to continue with a capitalist system is made crystal clear in this section of its manifesto. It states, and I quote, "Labour will amend the takeover regime to ensure that any business identified as being, quote, systematically important, unquote, has a clear plan in place to protect workers and pensioners when a company is taken over." This is the Labour Party. Their policy is further emphasised on page 19, in which they state, and I assure you I'm quoting, quotes, "In government, Labour would give more people a stake." I think through the heart, but it doesn't say that. "And they'd also give us a say in our economy by doubling the size of the cooperative sector and introducing a right to own, making employees the buyer of first refusal when a company they work for is up for sale." Just grasp that. So if you work for a company that's going bankrupt and it's up for sale, they're prepared to give you the opportunity to buy it before anybody else. But if you can't afford it, or you don't want to, then the next big business, maybe from America, they buy, or Saudi Arabia, they might buy it. But the Chinese. It makes me think, reading this section on the economy, whatever happened to Labour's current leaders and the call to reinstate into the party's constitution clause 4. That clause, so that everybody understands what it is, requires the common ownership of the means of production, distribution and exchange. It's the clause that was ripped out of the Constitution by the Labour Party, led by Tony Blair in 1995, and replaced by a commitment to a market-driven mixed economy, which has seen publicly owned sectors privatised, as we heard throughout today in the debate. They want a fair tax system. This is a good one. I don't know who wrote this. Labour's fair taxation system only proposes an unspecified tax increase for the top 5% of earners to contribute more in tax to help fund our public services. The manifesto pledges not to extend VAT to food, children's clothes, books and newspapers and public transport fares. That's pretty good of them, isn't it? Value-added tax is a tax that was and is imposed by the European Union. And no socialist who calls himself or herself a socialist can have anything to do with VAT. It is a system that calls upon people who are pensioners or unemployed to have to pay the same tax for goods and services as a multimillionaire. Well, that's not a tax system that I would support. VAT shouldn't simply be extended or reduced. It should be abolished along with the European Union, and not maintained. The Labour Manifesto calls for businesses, that's about the 4th or 5th time, and I've only got to page 2, and large corporations, that's multinationals, to pay a little more corporation tax. Well, as a socialist, shouldn't they be talking about all businesses and all corporations being taken into public ownership? I thought that that is what a socialist party should be doing. Even a social democratic party, like the Labour Party, should be calling for a corporation tax of 40%. But that, of course, requires a socialist approach, and the very word terrifies them. A sensible tax policy is outlined by the Socialist Labour Party, our party. I'll read it to you. Income tax, which is the only tax that makes sense. You're taxed on the basis of what you earn or receive. In Band 1, anyone receiving or earning up to £25,000 will pay no tax. Band 2, £25,000 to £55,000, they will pay 30%. Band 3, £55,000 to £80,000, 40%. Band 4, £80,000 to £100,000, 50%. Band 5, £100,000 to £200,000, 60%. Band 6, £200,000 to £500,000 income, 70%. And anyone earning or receiving over £500,000, 90%. Are these views, are these policies revolutionary? Not at all. They are based upon the same tax calculations implemented by the Labour Party and the Tory Party between 1945 and 1960. Well, if it was right then, why isn't it right now? Just imagine what it would do. Even under the present tax system, instead of going round having to beg with buckets for water aid, cancer research, heart transplants, all the things that you need when there's a disaster in the world, wouldn't it be better if we had a sensible tax system even now? Just look what 1% would do. 1% across the board under the current tax system would raise $6 billion a year. 10%, which I would favour, would increase the amount to $60 billion. Now that's enough to meet the shortfall in the National Health Service, the education system, social welfare and pensions. In fact, as far as pensions are concerned, Labour ought to be considering returning to increases in line with the retail price index and not the consumer price index which they have accepted. And I find that an appalling thing. They've got a heading called Balancing the Books. Labour's manifesto makes clear it's committed to having a public service based on the foundation of sound finances. Well, I take a different approach. I say that public services should be based upon the needs of people and not on fiscal manipulation, not concerned primarily with balancing of books. The reason's simple. When our argument. Full employment and decent wages for workers would result in a taxation policy which, together with profits from national and nationalised industries, would fully fund a sensible socialist programme. This is a sensible and necessary approach to fulfilling the aspirations of people rather than an obsession with balancing the books. And any socialist worth his or her salt would have argued that case. Infrastructure investment, that's another of their headings. The manifesto calls for a national transformation fund that will invest 250 billion. My heart jumped. I thought, wonderful. But wait for it, over 10 years. It's like a never-never plan. A simple solution which would help meet these costs would be to scrap the 100 billion expended on the stupid policy and immoral policy of the Trident nuclear programme and the scrapping of the HS2 high-speed rail link and replace it with a policy where all rail systems that were wiped out by the Beeching policy are restored. Just imagine what we could do. Instead of spending billions on HS2, we could spend that money on electrification and refurbishment of existing lines between London and Manchester, London and Birmingham, London and Sheffield, London and Cardiff, London and Glasgow, providing real investment and real facilities for the neglected north of England. It was also install an efficient rail network system which was new and conveying people in proper order to the south coast, including Brighton, Cornwall, Devon. In other words, let's see an establishment of a rail system which will truly link the south with the north and the west with the east throughout Britain. It's a common sense policy. The majority, 80% of our rail system at the present time are all owned by foreign companies. It's either Richard Branson when he's not going to space, he owns one. It's others from the Middle East, they own them. Well, I would take those railway systems, lock, stock and barrel, into public ownership and control. And I agree with compensation, but I'd make them pay compensation to us for what profits they've had over the years. Energy. If you've still got it after listening to this, the Labour Party Manifesto is committed, listen to this, to transforming our energy system and investing in a new state-of-the-art low-carbon gas and renewable electricity production. It is not only short-sighted, but a policy which doesn't make economic sense, and it certainly doesn't make environmental sense. It's a policy that represents betrayal of Britain's indigenous coal industry, an industry which is able to produce all the electricity we need, and also produce from that coal all our oil and gas that we currently import by using what's known as carbon capture. It will produce all our indigenous energy in all those forms with zero emissions. Now that's a policy that makes sense. We could also produce from coal all our petrochemicals, far cheaper and certainly far safer than the disastrous nuclear energy program for producing electricity. I've been opposed to nuclear power all my life. And when you challenge them about nuclear power, they haven't got an argument. Do you know that every one of the industries, including nuclear, including wind, including wave, tide, you name them, they're all getting heavy subsidies? Do you know how they pay for them? They're putting onto your electricity bills what's called a carbon tax. So that the carbon tax pays for the renewable energy that produces 7% of our energy needs. Now, if that's not stupid and inept, then I don't understand economics at all. To me, a common sense policy will be to utilise the indigenous product that we have. We've got 1,000 years of coal, so why don't we use it? It amazes me when they say they want to set out a sustainable energy policy. They say, quite correctly, that they want to stop fracking. And they committed, they say, to taking energy back into public ownership. That's on page 20. But they've got a problem. Because it clearly implies, on page 20, that supporting this policy means the creation of publicly owned, locally accountable energy companies and cooperatives to rival existing private energy suppliers. Now that clearly implies that the Labour Party will retain private enterprise. Not in my name. The section referring to the nuclear industry is both economically and environmentally unacceptable. Tony Benn consistently and correctly argued that the nuclear energy program, in all its forms, either militarily or for the production of electricity generation, is unacceptable. The disasters alone at Windscale in 1957, 3 Mile Island in 1979, Chernobyl in 1986, and Fukushima in 2011 have proved our correct Tony Benn and the entire anti-nuclear movement have been all throughout the campaign. Incidentally, I was on the commission into the Chernobyl disaster. The whole area has been completely destroyed. It's uninhabitable. You can't go near it. And by the way, the disaster in Britain means that there are still food supplies of all kinds in Cumbria, in Wales, not from Chernobyl, but from our own nuclear industry that you're not allowed to eat because they're contaminated. How many people outside this room know that in the discharge pipe into the Irish Sea at Windscale, now conveniently called Sellafield, the radiation level is 56 times higher than the atomic testing grounds in the Pacific Ocean? Some policy for energy, some sustainable energy policy at all. It says that Labour's committed to ensure security of energy supply and keep the lights on and ensure that energy costs are affordable for consumers and businesses. You know, business again. This commitment is in complete contradiction to the party's statement on page 12 which implies that Labour will continue to allow private companies to produce energy and electricity. And just like their policy on rail, they will only consider taking any of it into public ownership and control at the end of their licensing period, some of them which go to 2034. What a programme for a party that says it's got a socialist outlook. Well, it needs to go to see a new optician because its outlook is clearly blurred. The manifesto admits that 1 in 10 households are in fuel poverty and that customers are being overcharged by $2 billion a year. Yet it proposes to deal with this by introducing an emergency price cap to ensure that the average dual fuel household energy bill remains below £1,000 per year. Now, if people are being overcharged by $2 billion, somebody's making a hell of a lot of money to which they're not entitled. They call it overcharging, I call it theft. And in my view, it's a clear-cut case to take all the lot of them into public and common ownership and control immediately. There can be no argument about why they shouldn't do it. Have you noticed any difference, even so far? The Labour Party are talking about they'll take certain things into common ownership, public ownership, when their licence expires. The Tories had no compunction about privatising the Channel Tunnel or the Rolls-Royce factory or other areas where they nationalised it, made it good and made it profitable with public money, and then literally within weeks privatise it in the interests of big business. That means the Labour Party policy is no different from the policy of the Tory government or even that government that called itself a coalition. Its energy policy is even more contradictory. On page 2, it says it's going to take energy back into public ownership to deliver renewable energy, affordable for consumers with democratic control. Yet, it proposes to do this by regaining control of the supply networks. I'll quote this because obviously you need to know. Through the alteration of the national and regional network operator licensing conditions. Now that's a good socialist way, isn't it? Eh? We're going to just amend the national and regional network operating licensing. Why don't we just do what they did in 1945 and take the whole of the electricity industry at all levels into public ownership? They did it in weeks. They're talking about years, and even then paying somebody to do it. Some promised land, some policy. Labour's policy is even further confusing, maybe deliberately discriminating, when it says, quite correctly, Labour will ban fracking because it would lock us in to an energy infrastructure based on fossil fuels. Well, I'm sorry, but how do they explain that statement? When on the one hand, on page 12, they're committed to investing in the new state-of-the-art low-carbon gas policy. Gas is a carbon fuel. So why on the one hand don't they want to lock into a policy which produces carbon and carbon emissions, And on the other hand, they're going to invest in it, into gas, by the way, which needs importing at an enormous cost. Whether it's from the Middle East or from Russia or from other parts such as Norway into Britain. All of them making billions out of Britain. And yet, all of that only produces from alternative energy sources 7%. I'll tell you how daft it is. They pay farmers not to grow food. And they persuade them that they've got to grow quick-growing trees within a year. And then they chop them down. Chop them up, transport them to a power station to burn to produce electricity. Now, if there are anybody who sneaked in from, say, the Sun or the Daily Mail, trees take in carbon dioxide and make the planet better. And if you chop them down, it releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So how the hell they can justify that policy escapes my understanding. They say, of course, that they welcome alternative energies such as wave, barrage, hydroelectricity, geothermal and solar. But these will not become reality in the period when consumers are desperate for energy. They know it, I know it, we all know it. And even this week, there have been announcements made that we're running into real trouble in terms of affordable energy or energy at any cost. And they're looking to turn back towards fossil fuels as the only alternative. Well, our party welcomes alternative energies. We welcome wave and barrage, hydroelectricity, geothermal, and above all solar. But everybody knows that these are not going to be available for years. A nuclear power station, which we oppose totally, takes 10, 15, 30 years at an enormous cost. The Hinkley Point project already is 15 to 20 billion more than it was when they first quoted for it. Global warming must not be confused with climate change. The climate has been changing for billions of years. If you don't believe me, watch the programs on television currently about the climate and how it's changed over the years. How we've had an ice age. How we've had the earth so hot that life are difficulty even surviving. Climate does change. We've seen it even in our lifetimes. And you don't need to live in the West to understand how bad or good it can be. Where they don't burn any carbon at all in the sub-Saharan area, what they've got are droughts, they've got nothing that will grow, and nothing that makes common sense. The main reason why we have global warming is because mankind has demonstrated yet again its madness by the deforestation to which I've just referred. It's destroyed large areas of rainforests and woodlands worldwide. To put it into perspective for you, they destroyed a rainforest only recently in the Amazon, larger than France. All of that forest that took in carbon dioxide and gave out oxygen. And then they say, really, it's carbon that's doing it. No, it isn't. It's they who are doing that. And it's global warming and not climate change that we're talking about. if one traces back CO2 emissions to the time before deforestation worldwide, it can be seen that rainforests and woodlands generally were the main protectors against CO2 pollution. 80% of pollution in the United Kingdom today is caused by oil and gas, particularly on transport, roads, air and sea. And let me make this point. We were told, all of us were told, that if we closed down Britain's coal mines, the atmosphere would become cleaner. We would no longer have the pollution in our cities. It's worse now than it's ever been. And the reason? We've got juggernauts from all over Europe pouring into Britain, polluting the atmosphere. We've got aircraft not just landing in Britain, but overflying Britain. And we've got tankers by the score spewing out their filth into the atmosphere. That's where global warming is coming from. And the only way to stop it is to stop them from doing it. Nuclear power. I know that Hassan there is with me on this one. We're committed to getting rid of nuclear power. It's the most dangerous form of energy ever devised. Tony Benn warned of its dependency and said it would be disastrous both from a safety and economic point of view. Tony Benn was actually a witness for me in 2 public inquiries. The first one was at Sizewell. And I wanted to call Tony Benn as a witness. After all, he was the longest serving Secretary of State for Energy in Europe. So I made an application. And the judge said, I can't agree to that. You'll have to consult the legal advisor. I said, I thought you were the judge. Yes, he said, but this is rather different. I said, in what way? He says, the inquiry's got a legal advisor. I said, well, can I see him? He said, well, he's in London. So you'll have to go there. So I went to London. And I saw this Queen's Counsel in all his finery. And I explained the problem. And I said, the judge has told me to come and see you. Because I want to call Mr. Benn. He says, that's beyond me. You'll have to see the judge. Because he's just sent me up here. I said, I have to go back down there. So I went back and I said, look, we've got a problem. Or at least you have. You say he is the one that decides. He says that you are. I said, because I'm going to call him whether you agree or you don't. He said, well, we'll agree provided he can only ask the questions I agree. I said, well, it's my intention to ask him to make a statement first, after which I will cross-examine him. You could see a little tension on him. Normally, at this inquiry, it was sleepy. There were about 5 or 10 or 15 people regularly go. 2 pressmen were there normally. When I called Tony Benn on the day in question as my witness, it was like ticket only at Wembley for cup final. You couldn't get a seat. The press couldn't get a seat. They were packed like sardines. So Tony Benn gave all his eloquence, all his knowledge, all his information about nuclear power. And so I have the temerity to ask a question. I'm able to tell you now, because they cannot sue the debt. Tony and I had agreed the question. I said, Mr. Bent, I said, is it true that a Prime Minister in Britain reached an agreement with a foreign president to install fast breeder reactors in Britain without anybody in Parliament being notified, without knowledge of the Cabinet, or without knowledge of the Secretary of State for Energy? He said, what? And the judge said, you can't answer that. I said, I thought it was a very reasonable question. You could see all the scribes ready with the pens. I'm sorry, he says, you can't ask that. So Tony Benn says, I understand your difficulty. He says, maybe I can help you. He said, the part of the papers, Mr. Scargill, that you're referring to, the documentation that you're asking for, you will find in the Cabinet Office and also in the Department of Energy. And you could see it was too late. The question was asked. And he'd already given me the answer before I asked it. So it put him on the spot. Not a word in the press. Not a word. The next public inquiry was at Hinkley Point. And I'm again representing the anti-nuclear groups, an advocate. And I called another bloke called Tony Benn again to give evidence. And I thought, this time I'm not going to notify anybody. So the judge must have had it was one of those sleepy afternoons, you know. So I asked him, I said, Mr. Benn, could you tell me, have you any knowledge that there was ever an occasion when a British Prime Minister reached a secret agreement with a foreign president to install the fast breeder reactor, by the way, the most dangerous reactor in the world, unknown to anybody in Britain, unknown to the Cabinet, unknown to the government, unknown to anyone? He said, yes. This judge never moved. He must have heard it. I said, could you tell me who it was? He said, yes. Mr. Callahan, Prime Minister, and the President was the French President, Giscard d'Estaing. I said, thank you very much. Not a word appeared in the press. And there was a deal done to install the most dangerous reactor in the world without the knowledge of anybody, between two people. The disasters I've referred to not only prove what was said at those inquiries, or what was said repeatedly by people like Tony Benn and myself, but there's no reference in the Labour Manifesto to those countries which have abandoned nuclear power. I'm talking about electricity production. For example, Germany, Japan, Ireland, Switzerland, Spain, Belgium, Denmark, Sweden, and Cuba. Not a word. Now, why is that? You would have thought that somebody would be asking the question, particularly about Germany. Germany now produces 30% of its electricity from coal. They've gone back to coal. But it's the poorest quality coal in the world. It's called lignite. It's a brown coal. It's only a third as efficient as the best quality coal we've got in Britain, in South Wales and Scotland. Oh, of course, all throughout England, even in Kent. By the way, two of the largest coal fields we've got, one's in Surrey and one's in Kent. There's also one in Essex. So we've got plenty of coal, and the big one, the one we really wanted, is under Oxford. So, you know, it should have no difficulty extrapolating it cleanly, efficiently, without emissions. But that's the kind of policies that they're not even referring to. They don't refer to those countries that have abandoned already. And of course in Australia, only this week, the Australian Prime Minister says, we're no longer going to be subsidising alternative energies. In future, we're going to be supporting an affordable energy policy based on coal in Australia and gas from Australia. That's what it is, and it's going to be affordable for the people of Australia. That's happening also in China. It's happening in Indonesia, and it's happening in other countries as well. We then turn, of course, if you're interested, to the trades and National Education Service. We've had some discussion about this today. The Labour Manifesto states that education is what empowers us to release our full potential. Well, we'd all agree with that. When it fails, it's not just the individual that's held back, but all of us. When we invest in people to develop their skills and capabilities, we all benefit from a strong economy and society. I agree with that. But listen what they go on to say. The manifesto says, we shall, quote, meet this responsibility by creating a unified national education service for England to move towards cradle-to-the-grave learning that's free at the point of use, and yet when one reads its education policy, it's not committed to a principle that, quotes, every child and adult matters, because it does nothing to end discrimination on either religious or class basis. On the contrary, this is the Labour Party policy. It makes clear on page 40 that in recognition of the role played by private sector providers, now how the hell does that square up with a free education policy? In other words, public schools such as Eton, Harrow and Winchester, by the way they're all private, will continue to retain their elitist status. Such a policy can't be accepted by any socialist. It makes no reference to what we believe should be done. We believe that we should ban all faith schools, all private schools, because these are the type of schools that produce prejudice, both in a class way and also in a religious way. I don't care whether you look at the issues in Ireland with Protestant and Catholic, or Islam from Judaism, or Hindu from Islam, or Buddhist from Taoism, or any other religion that you want. They're all designed at a young age to breed in to the young prejudice and intolerance and injustice. And why is it that at our universities people go, irrespective of their age, irrespective of their class, irrespective of their colour, irrespective of their ethnicity, and irrespective of their religion? Now if Oxford, Cambridge, Hull or Southampton universities can take somebody who is a Protestant, a Catholic, a Hindu, an Islam, a Jew, doesn't matter what faith they are, a Buddhist, why the hell can't they do it at junior school and primary school so that all our kids are educated in exactly the same way? In other words, we would abolish not only all private and faith schools, but we'd have one unified, comprehensive system of education, as was the policy of the Labour pioneers and of all those socialists, and in particular those who created the original Socialist Labour Party in 1903. There's no reference in the manifesto, none at all, to the countries which produce already a free education. For example, in France, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Iceland, Austria, Belgium, Czech Republic and Greece. And yet we penalise our young people to a massive debt. And at the end of their education they're landed with this debt. Or their parents are landed with this debt or both. I say it's the height of hypocrisy that we've got many members of Parliament who all were educated free of charge, and yet they've got the audacity to introduce massive charges and penalise young people with £40,000 to £50,000 at the end of their education. That's not investment in education, that's a criminal act in my view. Dignity for those who cannot work. That's the next one on the list. It says Labour seeks not only to ameliorate the present system. That doesn't mean change it, it just means tinker with it. Which consigns people to poverty, including the 4 million children currently recognised as living in poverty. So they do recognise there's 4 million children living in poverty. And the way they're going to deal with these people in need of care is by a meagre increase in the scandalously low carers allowance and put it to the same level as the job seekers allowance. And that's their answer. Well, I'll tell you ours, shall I? Our answer is a simple one. We say that every person, man or woman, is entitled, whether they are in a low-paid job or unemployed or pensioner, all of them should have the equivalent income of the national average wage, currently £25,000 a year. By the way, that's not outrageous. It's equal to no more than £12 an hour, only £2 difference from what the Labour Party say they want to pay, but only to workers. That's the difference between a Social Democratic Party and a Socialist Party. Housing. This is a cracker of theirs. Their policy is a disgrace. It's an insult. Not just to us, but to the Labour government policy between 1945 and 1951. They promised that they will invest to build 1 million new homes, but over 5 years. You know, it's a joke, isn't it? With all these people homeless, living in poverty, living in terrible conditions of squalor. And what their answer is, to build 1 million homes in 5 years. And what type of homes? They're committed to retaining the private housing market. And he now is removed if you read page 61. This commits the Labour government to guarantee Help to Buy funding until 2027 in order to give long-term certainty to both first-time buyers and the house building industry. The Labour Party Manifesto is committed to retaining private renters, that's private landlords. One of the ways in which they will achieve this irrational aim, and listen, I thought I was something wrong with my glasses, is to, quote, empower tenants to call time on bad landlords by giving renters new consumer rights. Now, that's the policy of dealing with private landlords. Compare the Labour Party's policy with ours. They would only build 100,000 council houses or association housing a year. And what's called an affordable rent or sale. It's a policy that retains private landlords. Our party would build or refurbish 1 million homes in a year. How would we do it? Simple. We'd employ the unemployed building workers to put the buildings up. That's the way to deal with the problem that's facing you. The unemployment figures are a nonsense. You know it and I know it. The unemployment figures of about 1.4 million are underestimated massively. The number of people actually seeking work that can't get work and can't even get unemployment benefit are around 5 to 5.5 billion. It's these people that could be put to work. People who've lived here all their lives could be put to work to do that job, to build the houses that we need. And if that hasn't brought me on tidily to the National Health Service, nothing will. The policy in respect to the National Service, quite frankly, has made me ill. It simply ameliorates the present system, rather than taking the concept of an iron bevan to the ultimate objective of a National Health Service, including dental care, which provides health care for every person at the time of need, upon demand, and completely free of charge. We can help achieve this by abolishing the iniquitous private healthcare hospitals, abolishing hospital trusts, and restoring a National Health Service, not for the many, but for everybody. Everybody in Britain should come under the National Health Service, not one system for one group and another system for another. To do that is not merely social democracy, it's an acceptance of capitalism, and that we reject. Britain needs a National Health Service fully funded, with staff at all levels, including doctors, nurses, care workers, domestic support staff. It requires an immediate 35 billion, and it should be inflation-proofed in line with the retail price index. Justice. Now, this one will not cause any problems for anybody. It will not be controversial, I promise you. Labour claims it's committed to a justice system. We've just been discussing this, so I'm sure that the President will be interested in it. They haven't read it until today, and they've only just put this in for you to think about. Labour claims it's committed to a justice system to protect people whose rights are threatened. They would legislate to prohibit the characteristic of victims of domestic violence by their abuser in certain circumstances. This objective, which seems on the surface to be reasonable, I submit does not deal with the inherent iniquities that are there within. We want an end to either young women being put on a stand and cross-examined about their private life, their sex life, or, for that matter, the young men. We want to be dealt with in an inquisitorial system, where the documentation is put before someone who's independent, somebody, including a jury, that's independent. We believe we want to go much further. We demand that judges should be elected and re-elected every 5 years. If it's good enough for a member of Parliament to be elected and re-elected, or a local councillor to be elected and re-elected, and a trade union leader to be elected or re-elected, why the hell should a judge handing down a judgment not be elected and re-elected? And in addition to that, we would adopt the French system. We would separate the appointment of judges. Judges in France are trained from word go to be judges. They've got nothing to do with the barristers or the solicitors in France, because it's incestuous. If you pull from the ranks of barristers and solicitors to create judges, one day they're the barrister, next day they're the judge. In France, the judges are appointed from the judicial school. The barristers and solicitors remain where they are. In other words, you start to get a fair crack of the whip. And in particular, judges should have juries wherever a defendant wants a jury to determine what the issue is. Infrastructure and investment. quite honestly, it says it will create a national transformation fund that will invest 250 billion over 10 years to upgrade our economy. Quite frankly, it's a nonsense. The only way to do that is to have real investment. We can do it. We can save over 100 billion on the Trident programme. We can save over 100 billion on this stupid HS2 rail system. That's just two ways. We can begin to produce our own electricity and energy from our indigenous product instead of importing it and paying billions. We can start to produce our own food instead of importing it. Before we joined the European Union, we were producing 80% of our own food. Today, we produce 59%. And yet, look at our European competitors. Go into any supermarket, you can't move for tomatoes from the Netherlands. You'll even find potatoes from Israel. Not by the way, not from me. I would advise everybody to boycott any Israeli goods. The thing is that, why are we importing that which we can produce? And this morning, negotiating Brexit was raised. And I know that Kim's got a point about Brexit, but so have I as well. See, Labour says it accepts the referendum result in 2016. Yet it's got a policy of retaining the benefits of the single market and customs union. They've apparently forgotten or ignoring the fact that the current leaders of the Labour Party repeatedly voted against every treaty and every directive, including the treaties of Maastricht and Lisbon, which introduced the iniquitous arrangement for the free movement of capital and labour, which have had and are having a direct threat to British workers and British industries. And let me stress, you'll note that I said the policy of capital and labour. The free movement of capital and labour. They're two different things, but within the same umbrella. Capital is when they move the industry lock, stock and barrel abroad. Now they did it. Take for example Waterford Crystal in Ireland. World famous. So they moved it to Czechoslovakia. Why? Simple answer. They can pay £10 per hour less than they pay to the Irish workers. So 8,000 workers lost their jobs and they went abroad. That's the free movement of capital. That's what it does. They've done it with everything else. We used to produce numerous cars, from Rolls-Royce at one end to a Mini at the other end. Vauxhalls between them, Morris Minors, Austins, you name them, Jaguars, the lot. All of them now owned by somebody else, particularly Germany. Why is it that they can produce and manufacture the goods that we used to do? We don't even produce an aeroplane. And yet we had the best aeroplanes in the world in the Second World War. And here we are, we can't produce one. We're arguing about, Bombardier, which is a Canadian company. Now Canada's population is nothing near ours, but they're able to build an aeroplane. Why the hell can't we build the aeroplane here? We've got the expertise, the knowledge. We led the world after the Second World War. Today we haven't got one manufacturer, either in cars or in aeroplane manufacture. The only car manufacturer we've got left is Morgan, that produces about 20 Morgan cars a year. Some job. Acceptance of the single market and customs union in any form prevents Britain from giving subsidies to vital sections of our economy, unless it's given approval by the bureaucrats, unelected ones, of course, in Brussels. The only subsidies that they allow are those which lead to the closure of an industry and to the loss of thousands of jobs. In Britain's case, this has reduced our manufacturing base, as I previously explained, from 80% of our economy down to 10% of our economy. It is political, economic and social suicide to even contemplate retaining the single market or the customs union. I know what I'd do with Keir Starmer. I know he used to be my lawyer. He used to pretend to be on the left. I'd remind him that there was a previous Keir, Hardy, who wanted to see the nationalisation of the means of production and distribution in this country and not be part of a European states, a United States of Europe, because that's really what it is. In its manifesto commitment, it wants to maintain membership of the European organisation called Euratom, and the European Medicines Agency, and the Erasmus scheme. It's a sellout by the apologists in Labour, who don't want to seek amendments. They want to destroy the referendum result, and they want to retain membership of the European Union. Coming out of the European Union is the best decision that's been made in 50 years. Prior to joining, you know, the costs are important. And they're going on all the time. It's on every night on television. They could be talking about the new programme of Darth Vader or Mickey Mouse. They'll get in. It's being caused by the European Union. Did you realise that there's been a storm over southern South Australia? This, of course, is directly linked with Brexit. I mean, you listen to everything that they said, they bring Brexit in. Channel 4 are obsessed. I'm surprised they don't put, have a new referendum. Look what they did in Ireland, can't we do the same? Because that's really what they're after. The suggestion by Labour that they will ensure there is no drop in EU structural funding. I'll read that again. The suggestion by Labour that it will ensure that there is no drop in EU structural funding as a result of Brexit until the end of the current EU funding in 2019-2020. That means that Britain will have to continue paying a membership fee annually of 10 billion. But that's not the story. In addition to that, we have a trade deficit every year with the European Union countries of 60 billion. Now, my maths have never been good, but 60 and 10 makes 70. 70 billion a year we lose. And yet in trade with the rest of the world, we're 40 billion in surplus. Makes common sense not only to come out, but to come out quick. Get out now. So why haven't we done it? We should have done. Article 50, Roman numeral 1, stipulates, quotes, any member state may decide to withdraw from the Union, that's the European Union, in accordance with its own constitutional requirements. Prior to the Lisbon Treaty of 2009, which extended the EU's power over member states, there was no Article 50. Do you know that former EU members, these are countries that were in the European Common Market and then the European Union, have left with no problem? I bet you've never heard of them. Algeria, because of its links with France, was allowed to leave in 1962. Allowed in the sense that it sent them a letter. Greenland, that's a protectorate of Denmark, had a referendum. And in 1985, they left the European Union. And Saint Barthélemy, a former French colony in the Caribbean, left the Union. And all three did so by simply writing a letter saying goodbye. we've gone. That's all that was needed. All this nonsense from the Prime Minister about invoking Article 52 and all the subsections have produced the nonsense that we're seeing in Parliament. All that was needed was one letter. We're leaving the European Union the day after the ballot for in or out, goodbye, yours, that's it. That would have been it. No, we're going on and on and on with these. How much money will we give them? If we're talking about money, they should be giving us money, not us giving them money. Our party's position is clear. We should withdraw from the European Union, and it's a central point for us now, as soon as possible. I don't want to see a deal. I want to see us get rid of the deal. It's a deal that ties us inextricably to NATO. It makes us part of an armed alliance. It also makes us, don't forget, part and parcel of what's going to be a European army. A view first thought about by Adolf Hitler. And here we are, seeing them talk again about what we should do to protect ourselves. Protect ourselves. It's they who are invading others, like the United States are. And let me make my policy clear, and I'm sure it's the party's policy. We support Catalonia in the right for independence from Spain. The denial of independence of Catalonia was the edict and the last direct from a man called Franco, the fascist dictator of Spain. He gave a directive that never shall Catalonia be granted independence. Well, the people are on the streets saying we've voted for independence and we should support them. And it's a crime that Democrats all over the world, let alone socialists, shouldn't be supporting. They who fought so valiantly against fascism and Franco in the 1930s. Here we are. We always get the argument about immigration and migration. It's no good ducking it. But what's happening? There's a difference between immigration and economic migration from members of countries within the European Union. Listen to these facts and digest. In 2014-2015, 794,000 people entered the United Kingdom. Immigrants from outside the European Union, from West Indies, India, Pakistan, all the former colonies of Britain, or members of the Commonwealth, totaled only 251,000. That's 31.61%. Yet, economic migrants under the free movement of labour from European Union countries, mainly Eastern Europe, totaled 543,000, 68.38%. In the same year, 327,000 people emigrated out of Britain to go and live in other parts of the world. Now just work it out. 327,000 went out of Britain, and only 251,000 came into Britain as immigrants, or refugees, or asylum seekers. All of them welcome. And that still would have left us with 100,000 more than we could have taken. But look at the figures. In the same period, when they're denying there's been any increase, when they're arguing that there were only so many people came in, and they admitted it was 543,000 in that year, they issued in that same year 1.22 million national insurance numbers to European economic migrants. Figures don't lie, but liars can figure. You can say that again. They certainly are fixing the books. If Britain had a policy in force, and it should, that the number of people who could come into Britain, including refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants of first choice, we could take in, on the balance of how many people go out, 327,000. Where at the moment there's only 251,000 coming in. So the population of Britain should be going down. It was 59 million before the Lisbon Treaty kicked in Britain in 2005. Today, 67 million. Now, where the hell have those 6 million people come from? 7 million people come from? Where they got? Have they bred so much? Not at all. It's people who've come into this country under the freedom of movement. Hence, we've now got not 59 million people, which our health service, education system has to serve. We've got 67 million. And that's got to throw an enormous weight on all our public services, whoever's in charge, and whatever policies in charge. Opposition to membership of the European Union is part of our Socialist Labour Party policy and our international outlook. We want Britain to come out of Europe and back into the world, developing and expanding links with nations in Asia, Africa, South Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And let me make my position clear. I am appalled at the United Nations, on the behest of the United States, imposing sanctions against North Korea. It is the height of hypocrisy to surround North Korea with massive armed forces in the south of Korea on the one hand, and in the South China Sea have a fleet permanent stationed, armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons, and then say they're not entitled to be armed, but we're there to wipe them off the face of the earth. Because that's what that crackpot in America, that moron, has said. Therefore, we should say, not only to the United Nations and to America, we deplore what's taking place. I also deplore what China and Russia are doing or not doing. They should have had nothing to do with imposing sanctions on Korea, on North Korea. They should remember that in the 1950s it was the Americans who crossed the 38th parallel and said, we're going on all the way to China. Well, they got the shock of their lives when they were driven out and a ceasefire was agreed. The people who were breaking that ceasefire are the United States of America, who are pursuing policies that are mad, but threaten the whole of mankind and womankind. Their policy towards Venezuela is deplorable, and we should say that we stand foursquare with the people of Venezuela and oppose any sanctions which are being imposed upon them. There's no question about where our party should stand on international affairs. As far as Cuba is concerned, the breaching of the agreement deliberately created by the United States. They've been creating myths, telling lies for the last 100 years. They lied about the Kennedy assassination. I know it, you know it, they know it. And they've lied about Cuba. Nobody's broken with Cuba except the United States of America and Trump, who was being urged on by the ultra-right to do so, despite an agreement being signed by Obama with Cuba, which was of limited but important significance. The rights of work, some of it are enough to make you say, my God, how can anybody go along and join and support this party? Labour proposes a minimum wage of £10 an hour, but not until 2020. You're not having it. You can have it tomorrow, Jan. What happens if they don't have any movement whatsoever? They've got a 5-year parliament. at 5 years on, 2017. 22, isn't it? So in other words, their policy doesn't make sense unless they were the government. They don't propose a wage of £10 an hour for everybody. For workers aged 18 or under, they don't get it. They differentiate one from the other. It's a classic example of what they've always done. Divide and rule. They did it in Ireland. They did it on religious grounds and class grounds, south from north. But they had to have a division so that they couldn't be forced into conceding independence. In India, they did exactly the same. They give independence to India, but on the basis that it divides into religious division. On the one hand, the Hindus, and on the other, Islam. And of course, between them, there are other religious denominations. All of them have been living all right together. But it doesn't stop there. Look at Cyprus. We've got 2 bases in Cyprus, and they didn't lift a rifle butt when Turkey illegally invaded Cyprus and took over the north of the island. It happens everywhere. Britain pretends that we will defend our nation from any threat and now protect it from any threat. Well, they didn't do a bloody good job in Grenada when the United States invaded Grenada and resulted in the murder of the Prime Minister, Maurice Bishop. But that's what happened. Not a word from Britain, not a word of protest. Our party says that as far as rights at work are concerned, we will repeal all the trade union acts that have ever been adopted. They only said the Trade Union Act. Which one? Don't forget the Labour Party, when in government, they introduced some of the Trade Union Acts. They were the ones that removed the immunity granted to the union movement in 1906. Had it not been for that, they could never have sequestrated or put unions into receivership because they were protected. But it was the Labour Party in government in the 60s that claim now that they made a mistake when drafting. They drafted trade union rights out. Well, there's one way to deal with it. There are too many leaders of trade unions who are afraid or reluctant to stand up and fight back. Why is it that they don't, doesn't seem to be in the trade union movement the understanding that you can't confront a bully by simply backing away? Tragically, far too many trade union leaders are failing to defend their members against exploitation, abuse and loss of jobs. The Socialist Labour Party has made clear that trade unions should refuse to comply with unjust laws, adopt a policy of non-compliance. Don't forget, our forebears had a policy of non-compliance. That's why we have trade unions, because of the Tolpul martyrs and because of all the others who went on strike and fought back. It's why women got the vote, because of the bravery of the suffragette movement. And we all know saw advances when workers were prepared to stand up and fight back. We would not have seen the Pentonville 5 released had it not been for action. I've told you the story before, but it's true. I heard it from Vic Turner himself. They were locked up. They'd gone through every court in the land. The highest court had said they stay in prison at Pentonville. Vic Turner tells the story brilliantly. Well, he did. He was a wonderful man. He said, one morning, we were told we've got to go and see the warder's office. We went up, he said, thinking what we'd done wrong. All 5 of us. He said, when we walked in, there's a bloke there in funny breeches, a fluffy kind of shirt, a funny hat, and a long stick with a crook on it. And he said, this is the official solicitor. He has something to say to you. He went, I attend here today on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen to say to ye, and he named all five, that from this moment you are free to go. And Ricky said to her, what's happened? He says, you're free to go. He says, well, who are you? I am the official solicitor. He says, can I act for us regular? No. He says, can I ask another question? How many times have you done this job? You know, in the history of your job, how long does it go back? It goes back to 1400 and something. He said, how many times has it been used? This is the first. And Vic Turner says, do you know, I had a funny feeling that the thing that persuaded him was not the legal argument that we put forward a month before, but the fact that there was 1.5 million workers out on the streets demonstrating we're not going back. That's what moved them to release them. And finally, this party is committed to something that's not in that manifesto. Proportional representation, which I referred to earlier today. With proportional representation, this party could certainly have local councillors, certainly proportional representation. Since 1945, there would never have been a Tory government again. There could never have been a Tory government elected. And we would have seen at least some common policy, albeit not the one that we wanted to change society, but at least one that would have created the position where we could take the next step forward. But at the end of the day, there is only one thing that we can do. We can say, where should we go? Should we join all the thousands that have rushed into membership with the Labour Party because of the promised land somewhere in the distance, down the yellow brick road, and yellow is the word? Or should we do something different? Should we do what James Connolly told us to do in 1903? He said, never support Social Democratic Labour Representation Committee, a committee that later became the Labour Party in 1918. He said it would be a recipe for disaster in political, economic and social terms. History has proved Connolly's analysis was correct. I hope that you agree that our analysis of the Labour Party Manifesto is correct, and that you approve that a policy of going forward and resisting is the right way to go.